Good afternoon. What a beautiful Friday, huh? And a beautiful program so far. How about Katie Carver-Reed, our fabulous Vice President and Chief Operating Officer? Katie is an angel, and she is so committed and so good at her job. And it's an honor to share moments like this with you, Katie. And it's an honor to be here together today to kick off the 2025 Harvest for Hunger campaign once again. This is, I think, my 23rd Harvest for Hunger campaign kickoff. And I've really come to identify the entire spring season through the lens of Harvest for Hunger. And I imagine that's probably the case for many of our partners that are with us today. I know Katie went around and recognized our board of directors and other people that are here today. And so I just want to also extend my warmest greetings to all of our board members and our distinguished guests and our leaders and all of the supporters who work so hard to partner with the Foodbank every day. I also want to recognize up front that this is going to be a really unique speech for me. It's my intention to share a very, very personal story. And it's my belief that the story that I'm going to tell today is one that there is someone here that needs to hear what I'm going to say. And so while I'm sending out my greetings, I just want to ask right up front, where's all my people that struggle with worry and anxiety at? Where's my people? Yeah. Where's my people who struggle with sometimes trying to deal with this thing called anxiety? I see, today I have a little different assignment than normal at this kickoff. Usually I give a report about what's been happening at the food bank, maybe a little look at what's to come. But today I'm going to assume, as our closest friends, you already know why supporting Harvest for Hunger is important. And if I get this right, perhaps you'll even see it as even more important. We're in the last year of our strategic plan. I think it was 3 years ago I stood here before you, and I sort of outlined some of the elements of that plan. But one of its goals, one that emerged out of a lot of conversations during the planning process, was for the food bank to do more to confront the stigma that surrounds getting help with food. That goal is front and center for us. I know it's also an important topic for our partners in the mental health spaces and the substance abuse spaces. I served 6 years on the Summit County ADM board, and stigma came up all the time. And I was thinking about that in the fall when we were beginning to plan today's program. And at that moment, it was immediately clear how I wanted to spend my time with you today. Because almost as much as hunger, stigma is my sworn enemy. And today, I am going to tell you why. My mission here is simple: to confront stigma in the only way that I believe really moves the needle. This is going to be an emotional speech from me, but don't worry about me, friends. We're going to get through this. This is not a story about the stigma associated with getting help with food, although I believe that all stigma is fruit on the same sick tree. This is an intimate story about how I came to know the toxicity of the stigma the people we are trying to serve experience. This is a story about what led me to a new kind of empathy for them, and it's a story that inspired my long-nurtured but newly birthed crusade against stigma as a force in society and a force in this community. There is hope in this story, and again, I believe there's people here that need to hear it, so let's jump in. I guess I'll start by saying that being the CEO of the food bank was never really the plan for my life, because it might surprise you, I didn't have a plan for my life. I didn't even know what a food bank was when I when they called me for an interview. I'd answered a blind ad for a job, and they called me. I was like, food bank? What's that? And it wasn't until I started visiting the charities that get help from the food bank that I started to get glimpses of myself in the work. So I started my career at the Food Bank of Eastern Michigan, and not long, I realized it was what I wanted to do with my life. So we packed up the kids. I should say, my lovely wife of 28 years, Holly, who's with us today, the love of my life, this woman. And I will say that so much of this story, I'm standing here today in front of you because this woman had put my life together from day one. So I got hired as CEO of this food bank when I was 32 years old. I was one of the youngest food bank leaders in the country at the time. And fueled by a tremendous amount of personal energy and a ton of ego, the latter of which I hope the years have diminished far more than the former. Because my career, it got off to a fast and successful start, which was a surprise to me. And a lot of people who knew me when I was growing up, because that's not how things looked to be going early in my life. I was never good at school. I had a hard time paying attention. And although I was blessed with a loving family when I was 10, things took a turn at home. My mom was shopping one day, and a display of toboggans fell off the top shelf, and it hit her on the head. And it knocked her out cold, and I still remember coming home from school that day and hearing about her ride in the ambulance. She'd been doing great. She was beautiful, 40 years old, 2 sons, and an awesome husband. But that head injury that Mom had that day unleashed a storm of anxiety and depression in Mom that changed her life and all of our lives forever. Mom started having panic attacks. When she was driving to work or singing in the church choir, she'd leave in the middle of the song sometimes. My dad was always having to leave his job teaching 5th grade to go pick her up when she was having one of her swimmy-headed episodes. That's what she called it. She stopped being a room mother for my classes and chaperoning field trips, and as time went on, her life started to shrink, and she started spending more and more time in the living room of the house with the blinds closed. She gained a bunch of weight, she was depressed, and she struggled to function. And that's how the rest of my time at home went with Mom. She was always really sweet and loving and whip smart, always supportive, always going to the doctor, any doctor except a psychiatrist, which she was deathly afraid of. And she told me years later, after a simple 20 milligram a day dose of Celexa gave her so much of her life back, that she never sought help because she was scared they'd declare her crazy and take me and my brother Dave away. That's just heartbreaking for me to think about. Do you think that fear helped calm my mom's nerves? Not a chance. The stigma she encountered then is still a problem today, but it's nothing like it was back in the 80s. And so Mom suffered in silence. Although Mom's nervous condition was a dominant reality in our household, it was sort of the family's little secret. Everyone knew that something was up with Mom, but we never talked about it. She was always so sweet. But if a friend or someone at church ever did say something about her, I always felt the strong mixture of hurt, anger, shame, and a really deep fear that I would ever fall into such a hole in my own life. And so I graduated from high school, and I left for college, and I threw myself into the world with a vengeance. I put myself on every stage I could find. I worked my butt off and did everything possible to prove myself in the world. And my brother, on the other hand, Dave, he went to college and studied psychology. He entered therapy, and he became a therapist too, and he was always on my case about going to therapy. He's like, bro, we have a lot to unpack, you know? But I wouldn't hear any of it. I was like, that's you, Dave. That's you, and that's Mom. I'm fine. Well, years passed, and I got married, and we had 3 beautiful kids, and we moved to Ohio, and I got this job. And things were going great. I was always a little anxious, bouncing my knee under the tables. And I mean, you guys know me, right? bouncing my knee under the table in meetings and not sleeping all that great. But man, I was an old school grinder before I ever even heard that term. I got after it and got some really big early career wins here at the Foodbank, and many of them were in partnership with a lot of people that are in this room today. But once again, life took a turn when my dad had a heart attack in 2008. My dear, sweet dad, who passed away in 2021, and many of you in this room today sort of helped coach me through that grief and shared that grief with me. My son's here as well. Excuse me. Anyway, Dad went in for a bypass in the summer of 2008, and I'll never forget the torrent of fear that woke in me, man. I was just beside myself. And so we were just wrapping up our first capital campaign to get the building we're in now over on Opportunity Parkway. And I was scheduled one day to speak at a Kiwanis Club in Kent. And so I was running late. I wasn't prepared. I drank a bunch of caffeine. I hadn't been sleeping much. I was so worried about Dad. But none of that mattered because I'm a born public speaker, right? You know, like, and a natural doesn't need to be prepared. So I walked in late. The meeting was already started, and they introduced me, and I stepped up to the lectern, you know. Smiling, I began my opening sequence, cracking jokes and bantering with the crowd like always. And a few minutes in, something just flashed, and my head just got swimmy. My heart immediately started pounding, and I don't mean it. I think I drank too much pounding. It felt like I was going to explode. It felt like my heart was going to explode. My hands went numb. And since I didn't have notes or a script of any kind, I totally lost my concentration. And as I started to struggle in my remarks, the crowd just got more and more concerned, and that made me more scared. And finally, I said, folks, something is going on with me. I can't speak. I'm sorry. And I sat down at the head table and shaking. Here, I'll show you exactly how I did it. I got to get a drink of water anyway. It was kind of like this, just shaking. The shaking, I got a drink of water, and the club president went up to cover for me, and after a minute, I tried to rally. I was like, I'm not going out like this. So I was like, I'll try it again. So I stood up to give it another shot. The same thing happened, and I couldn't finish. I was sure I was having a heart attack or a stroke or something. The physical experience was so intense. I was scared to drive, and I had to have this old timer from the club take me over to Robinson Hospital. Man, he was a sweetheart, too. That guy was so worried about me. Anyway, I went back in. I met with a doctor, and he checked me over, and he came back, and he told me, he said, Dan, you didn't have a heart attack. He said that he thought that I had flashed, and that my fight or flight response had kicked in, and that I'd had an anxiety attack. And I was like, that? That was an anxiety attack? I couldn't believe it. I'd always been a high-strung guy up until then, but nothing remotely as intense as that had ever happened to me before. I couldn't believe it. So I called Holly. She was at Geauga Lake with the kids. I asked her to come pick me up. Anybody go to Geauga Lake? Yeah. That's how long ago this was. But she came up in the minivan to pick me up, and I walked out to the car when she arrived, and she was like, what happened to you? I was like, something not very cool, I said. So I got home that evening, and I jumped on the treadmill for a run, and I wondered, what did happen to me today? And although I didn't know it then, that was the day that my display of toboggans fell off the top shelf and hit me in the head. 2 weeks later, I was back in front of that same Kiwanis Club, and I kicked their butts. But I'd never been so nervous before a speech before, and that was peculiar to me. So I called my brother Dave, the therapist, and I told him what was going on. He was like, dude, you need to get your butt to therapy. And I was like, that's you, bro. Months went by, and I started finding myself worried I would have another anxiety attack in front of a crowd kind of like this one here, or at a board meeting, or at a staff meeting, or at the dinner table. And a lot of times I did. Nothing quite like the Grand Mall one I had in front of the Kiwanis Club that day, thank God. But avoiding anxiety attacks became consuming to me. I worked out even more than ever. I created a core discipline activity tracking log, right? And I meditated for 20 minutes every morning and every night for a year straight. Then I read the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, the Book of Mormon, Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, whatever, all trying to find something that could relieve this anxiety, but nothing helped. In fact, it got worse. Every day of my life became a miserable, constant effort to avoid anxiety. And in that time, and every day since, I never took a day off work because of it. I never canceled or avoided a single speech. I never refused to talk to the media, not once, ever. But I suffered super bad all the time in my head, and it sucked. I was too proud to talk to anybody in Ohio about it, but I did talk to my brother Dave, and he kept telling me, therapy, bro. Well, it finally got so bad, I was like, geez. Although my ego was far from done, I found a counselor online, and her bio read, I work with accomplished professional people that just need a little help at times. And I was like, perfect. That's just what my ego needed to hear. So I gave her a call, and I drove to my first appointment thinking of the thousands of people I've met in food lines over the years and the heartbreaking vulnerability that I'd seen in their eyes so many times. And it hit me really like a hammer that I was feeling that same vulnerability. When I arrived, the therapist greeted me at the door with a smile, and she said, please, have a seat at the sofa. And I was like, the sofa? Can I sit at the table? Then she was like, yeah. I was like, I'd be more comfortable if we sat at the table. So I sat down, she sat down across from me, and I straightened my jacket and my tie, and I opened my portfolio, and I slid her a business card. It's like, I'm Dan from the Foodbank. I don't think I need to be here, but my brother is a therapist like you, and he suggested I come in. And she looked up from her notes and gave me a look that said, we both know you're full of shit, mister. After our first session, we decided that I should go see her every couple weeks. And so 2 months later, I was on that sofa crying like a baby. And she taught me everything there is to know about anxiety. She gave me a little workbook with a bunch of great suggestions on how to cope with it. She helped me see the difference between it and me, which, believe it or not, was like a really big deal. And little by little, I started to get better. Finding the courage to reach out to a therapist was one of the most difficult and best decisions I ever made for myself. I came to know and understand my condition. I treated it. And she told me one day, after about 6 months together, Dan, I don't think you need to keep coming to see me. I don't want you to think that you can't survive without therapy every other week. And I was like, you're cutting me off? I need you. But she was right, of course, and cutting me loose was perhaps the most helpful and certainly the most professional thing that she could have done. And my time with Dr. Kiesler cleared the way for the happiest and most productive years in my life. Yes, I still wrestle with anxiety at times like right now. But it's far from the central theme in my life that it once was. And I hope so much that if there's anyone in this room going through something remotely similar to what Mom and I have gone through, I hope that you'll just do yourself a favor and skip all the shame and all the denial and all the stigma that tormented us and just go and get help. It's literally so much easier to get help than we think when we're stuck in it. That's why when I see pictures of me from that period of struggle in my life, it utterly breaks my heart to think of how messed up I was at the time. It's tragic. I attempted to confide in another community leader once when I was going through it some 17 years ago now. And he ruinously cautioned me, don't tell anyone about this, Dan. They'll think you can't do the job. And that advice fit in perfectly with a lifetime of feeling like anxiety was something to hide. So I never told anyone I worked with about it. I was always so scared people would think there was something fundamentally wrong with me. And it all feels so ridiculous to me now. Ridiculous and sad. Growing up in a home affected by stigma and then going through my own experience with it has left me with a robust contempt for stigma as a corrosive, entirely useless force in society. At its most benign, it stands in the way of people getting help. And at its most malignant, it literally kills people. Every day, 130 people in this country kill themselves. And 122 of them are veterans. How many more people in difficult situations, like those associated with substance abuse and mental health and food insecurity and poverty, tragically choose desperation over the fear, the shame, and the humiliation of going to get help? It is an entirely unnecessary, counterproductive barrier that stands between us and our mission to love people and help people at the food bank. Thank you. From where I stand now, I almost feel complicit in that stigma, having been silent about my own experience with it for so long. All of those years, putting all of the love I can on people, while staying silent about a dark chapter in my life that could have helped set so many people free. And that's why I'm telling you this story today. Because I know there are people in this room and in this community carrying that same shame and guilt and fear around that I did for so long. And friends, my days of fear are over. Thank you. One of the great gifts of time is freedom. Besides, if any of you think that I can't be the CEO of your food bank by now after 23 years, there's nothing I'm going to do to change your mind. Really? Let's be honest. That's the same excuse I use for wearing jeans most days, too, now, by the way. One of my favorite quotes is from Father Lawrence Freeman of the World Community of Christian Meditation, and it says, "The goal of freedom should be reflected in its means." The goal of freedom should be reflected in its means. If you want to be free, you need to be living an increasingly freeing life. And for me, not dragging the shame and stigma around was a big step to becoming free. You know, over the years, I've had more than one staff member come into my office and set themselves free, to close my door, to thank me for their job, and burst into tears, telling me their own experience dealing with food insecurity at some point in their life. And what an honor it is to be that safe person, to be safe enough for someone to sit with them and to watch those chains come off. I want you to raise your hand right now if you want to be one of those safe people. If you want to be one of those safe people, raise your hand. Someone that will sit with people and help their chains come off. Look around this room right now. You see, you can put your hands down, thank you. You see, we are surrounded by so much more love and support than our shame and fear would have us know. And so, friends, we've arrived at the central point of my message today. There's this thing called the compassion of the afflicted. We discover a new kind of empathy for people that are under the weight of the stigma related to food insecurity and mental health problems and other things, after we wrestle with the role those stigmas have played in our own lives. Fighting stigma is messy work in the trenches. And it starts with us as individuals reconciling our own experience, and it is a lifetime of work. It's hard. But when we do that work, it can spread out from us as a healing force into the world. Friends, healed people heal people. And we want to heal people that come to the food bank. Now, consistently, we have featured the stories of people who have faced the challenges of food insecurity or poverty and mental health issues on this stage at this kickoff because we know the power of stories to shift the narrative around stigmatized conditions in our society. Imagine the power of your story to set people free, to inspire young people that are struggling right now with what you struggled with then. Young people that want to be where you are, but feel like there is a malfunction in them that obviously can't exist in you because look at how awesome your career's been. What is the use of our suffering if we don't use it to help other people get through theirs? Thank you, Gary. We go through these rough patches in life. We stand so strong while they're happening that no one even knows it took place, only to come out the other side and keep it a secret? What then is the value of that suffering? What if your little light? What if your little light, the little light that you want so much to let shine, is in fact the thing in your life that you were most hurt by? The death of stigma is in the courageous stories of those who have survived their lowest moments. The death of stigma is in the stories of those who have survived their lowest moments. The lifeblood of stigma, what it wants, is the fear and the shame and the denial of hope that keeps us in chains and keeps us from getting help. Friends, make use of your life's lowest moments. Join us in our work to set ourselves and our neighbors free from the chains of stigma. Join us in our work to meet people in their lowest moments. Help us pour love and compassion out on people. And I hope that you'll pour love and compassion out on yourself and get help if you need it. Help us by sharing your stories. Help us by volunteering at an agency or at the Foodbank, and by supporting our Harvest for Hunger campaign. Because the mission and the programs and the heart that you heard from the stage today totally depends on it. And so we hope that you'll stay with us. Now, I want to end the speech like I end all my speeches, by telling you, if no one has told you that they love you today, I want you to know that the Akron-Canton Regional Food Bank loves you, and I hope now you know a little clearer just how true that is. I'm going to stick around for a while if anybody wants to talk after the program, or get a hug before I leave. But that's all I have to say. Let's work to make this Harvest for Hunger campaign a success. Thanks so much. You're dismissed.